The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains as Tonia set down a warm plate of yam and eggs in front of her husband. She watched Tony glance up from his phone, flash a quick smile, and mutter, "Thanks." But something about that smile made her stomach twist. It lacked warmth. It lacked Tim. Tonia sat opposite him, trying to catch his eyes, trying to find the man she married beneath the cold silence. The man who once laughed over burnt toast and danced with her in the kitchen. That man had been fading day by day, and all she had left now was the ghost of his presence, and that hollow smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Later that evening, she tried to talk. "Tony, is everything okay? With work? With us?" Her voice was low, unsure, almost scared of the answer. He didn't look up from the laptop. "Everything's fine, Tonia. You worry too much." The way he said her name sounded rehearsed. Distant. She forced a small laugh. "I guess I miss how we used to be. We hardly talk anymore." He finally looked at her, but instead of affection, there was something else, annoyance. Guilt. "You're imagining things," he said briskly. "Don't start this tonight." And with that he stood, leaving his half-eaten dinner behind and walking upstairs. Tonia stared at his plate. Something deep inside her whispered that this was only the beginning, but she wasn't ready to face what that truly meant. Tonia stood in front of the laundry basket, sorting clothes like she had done 1,000 times before, until her hand froze. Nestled in the collar of Tony's crisp white shirt was a faint, rosy smudge lipstick. Not her shade, not her brand. She picked up the shirt, stared at the mark, then lifted it to her nose. Her heart skipped. The perfume, sweet, floral, expensive, wasn't hers either. A sickening sensation coiled in her stomach as a quiet voice in her head screamed what her heart wasn't ready to admit. But she wasn't the type to confront without proof. Folding the shirt mechanically, she tucked it beneath the pile. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained calm. She told herself it could be anything. Maybe someone bumped into him at work. Maybe it was nothing. She wanted to believe that lie more than anything. That evening, as they sat in the living room watching television, she turned to him casually. "You wore your white shirt on Monday, right?" she asked. "The one I bought for our anniversary." Tony didn't flinch. "Yeah, why?" he replied, not looking up from his phone. "I just noticed a stain on it. Lipstick, maybe," she said softly. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing slightly. "You think I'm cheating on you over a smudge?" "Seriously, Tonia?" His tone was defensive, sharp. She held her ground, her voice even. "I didn't say that, I just asked." He stood abruptly. "I'm not doing this. Not tonight." And just like that, he left the room, slamming the door behind him. Tonia remained on the couch, the television now just background noise to the silent roar in her chest. It wasn't the stain that hurt. It was the way he didn't even try to comfort her doubt. That night, Tonia lay curled on her side, staring at the ceiling. The fan above spun in slow circles, and every creak of the house felt like a reminder of how empty her marriage had become. The space beside her in the bed was cold. Tony hadn't returned to the room. Her pillow was damp from silent tears she didn't want anyone to hear, not even herself. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to stop the ache that had taken root there. It wasn't just sadness. It was fear, the terrifying possibility that the man she once called her soulmate was slipping through her fingers like sand, and she didn't know how to stop it. She clutched the edge of the blanket, wondering how love that once lit up every corner of their home could vanish without warning. The next morning, she met her best friend Joy for breakfast at their usual cafe. Joy's brows furrowed the moment she saw her. "Tonia, you look like you haven't slept in days." "What's going on?" Tonia stirred her tea slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I think Tony is seeing someone else." Joy's expression hardened. "What makes you say that?" Tonia told her everything, the coldness, the lipstick, the scent. Joy listened, her hand resting gently over Tonia's. "You're not crazy, and you're not imagining it. But if it's true, you need to prepare yourself emotionally. Not just as a wife, but as a woman who deserves better." Tonia's throat tightened. "I just want to be wrong, Joy. I want to believe this is all in my head." Joy squeezed her hand. "Then let's find out for sure, because either way, you deserve the truth." Tonia nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. She wasn't ready for what the truth might be, but she knew she could no longer pretend. Jessica stood in front of the mirror, painting her lips with the same rose petal shade she knew had left its trace on Tony's shirt. She smiled at her reflection, a satisfied smirk creeping up her face. "He's slipping," she whispered to herself, pulling her curls over one shoulder. Tony had started spending more nights at her apartment, slowly but surely distancing himself from Tonia. Jessica didn't just want him, she wanted everything he had, including his last name. She knew how to play the long game. He had confided in her, complained about Tonia's growing insecurity, and how she always made him feel guilty. Jessica played her role perfectly. The understanding listener, the sexy escape, the woman who got him. And every lie she told him was sweetened with calculated affection. "Tonia doesn't see your worth, baby," she cooed one night, draping herself over him. "But I do." Tony exhaled as he lay back on her couch, drink in hand. "I just need peace. Tonia's always digging, questioning, acting like I owe her every detail of my day." Jessica leaned in closer. "You owe her nothing, Tony. You've given her years. And for what? Cold dinners and constant nagging." She let her fingers trail down his chest as she whispered, "You could have a fresh start." "With me." Tony hesitated only briefly. "It's complicated, Jess." But Jessica had already sensed the shift in him. The hesitation was growing weaker by the day. "I'm not asking you to rush. Just think about what you want long term," she said, planting a kiss on his cheek. In her mind, the battle was already won. All she had to do now was wait, because Tonia's grip was loosening, and Tony was already halfway out the door. Tonia had never been one to spy. It wasn't in her nature to snoop through phones or follow her husband around town. But that Saturday afternoon, something pulled her. Tony claimed he was attending a business lunch at the Orchid Lounge, a place she knew well. It was too upscale for casual meetings and too intimate for work-related gatherings. So she dressed down, slipped on sunglasses, and walked into the lounge alone. Her heart pounded in her chest like a warning bell, but she silenced it. She scanned the room, almost hoping she wouldn't find him. But there he was. Tony, sitting in a quiet corner booth, his arm casually draped around a woman with glowing brown skin and perfectly styled curls, Jessica. They laughed in sync, and then she saw it, the way his hand gently caressed Jessica's back. The look in his eyes, the way he kissed her. Tonia stood frozen. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the realization that he didn't look guilty. He looked happy. Her throat burned as tears welled up, but she turned away before they could fall. On her way out, she accidentally bumped into a waiter. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, concerned. She smiled weakly. "Yes," she lead. "Just remembered I left something on the stove." She stepped outside, and the moment the door closed behind her, the tears came like rain. Her body shook as she leaned against her car, gasping for air. Inside, Tony ordered dessert, unaware of the hurricane he'd just unleashed. And as Tonia drove away, the woman he once loved tightened her grip on the wheel, not in weakness, but with resolve. Something inside her had shifted. Something he would regret ever breaking. That evening, the silence in the living room was heavy as Tony walked in. Tonia sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes unreadable. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Tony barely looked her way. "About what now?" She took a deep breath. "About Jessica. About the Orchid Lounge." He stiffened, pausing mid-step. "What are you talking about?" he muttered. Tonia stood slowly. "I saw you. With her. You didn't even try to hide it." For a moment, Tony looked startled, but then his expression shifted into something colder. "So you're stalking me now. That's what it's come to." She flinched but didn't back down. "You lied to me. And now you want to make me the villain?" Tony exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand. Things haven't been good between us for a long time. I've been trying, Tonia." Her voice cracked. "Trying? By sneaking around with another woman. You didn't try, Tony. You gave up." His gaze hardened. "I'm tired of being accused. Tired of living under a microscope. Maybe if you weren't always so. Closed off, things would be different." The words cut deeper than a blade. Tonia's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "So it's my fault you cheated?" she whispered. Tony said nothing. The silence was louder than any argument. Finally, she turned to leave, whispering, "One day, you'll remember this moment and realize what you lost." And in that quiet exit, She left behind the version of herself that used to beg for love. 3 days passed before Tonia dialed Chris's number. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. I need to see you. It's urgent. Chris, ever composed, didn't ask questions. Come by the office at noon. I'll clear my schedule. Sitting across from him hours later, Tonia looked like a woman who had aged 10 years in a weak, tired eyes, stiff posture, but a fire burned quietly behind her sadness. He's having an affair, she said plainly. Chris folded his hands. I suspected it. But I take it you've confirmed it? She nodded. Saw them with my own eyes. And he still lies to my face. Chris leaned forward, concern etched into his features. What do you want to do, Tonia? Divorce? Confrontation? You name it. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the window, watching the world outside continue in ignorant peace. I don't want to react emotionally. Not yet. I need to think ahead. Chris studied her for a moment. Then we prepare. Quietly, strategically. She turned to him, finally meeting his eyes. Can you help me draft a new will? One he doesn't know about? Chris raised an eyebrow. You want to change your will? Tonia nodded. Yes, I want to protect what's mine. If he's already treating me like I'm disposable, I want to be ready when he does something drastic. Chris's voice was calm but firm. We'll keep this between us. And whatever happens, you won't go through it alone. For the first time in days, Tonia felt the flicker of a plan forming. She would not break. She would not beg. She would outthink them both. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed in her silk robe, her long legs crossed as she watched Tony pace around her apartment. Her tone was unusually firm. So, how long are we going to keep playing house in secret, Tony? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I told you, things are delicate. Tonia is not the kind of woman you just walk away from without consequences. Jessica narrowed her eyes. You're already gone. Emotionally, physically. Why not finish it legally? Her voice carried both impatience and entitlement. She stood and approached him, draping her arms around his neck. You keep saying you're tired of the drama, then end it. File for divorce. Tony looked away, silent. Jessica pressed on, her voice low. Or is there a part of you that still wants to go back? Tony pulled away, agitated. Don't twist this, Jess. I'm with you, aren't I? She folded her arms. Then act like it. Because I'm not going to be your little secret forever. His silence spoke volumes. Jessica's expression darkened. You made me promises, Tony. You said I'd have the life she takes for granted. He finally snapped, I need time. You don't know what it's like to disentangle years of marriage, family, finances, she interrupted, her voice sharper now. You think I care? I've sacrificed too much to be kept on the sidelines. Her ultimatum hung thick in the air. Tony exhaled slowly, shoulders slumping. All right, I'll talk to her. Jessica's smirk returned, but it lacked warmth. She wasn't just in this for love anymore. She wanted victory, and she was getting closer. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when Tonia walked into the hospital for a routine checkup. She hadn't been feeling like herself. Frequent dizziness, fatigue, and nausea had lingered for weeks. The nurse smiled kindly as she guided her to the exam room. Just a few tests, Mrs. Aidwale. We'll figure out what's going on. As she lay back, she tried to calm the worry that had taken root. She'd barely eaten that morning. When the blood pressure cuff tightened around her arm, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The nurse looked concerned. Let's get the doctor. Moments later, Tonia's vision blurred, and the room began to spin. Ma'am, can you hear me? Then everything went black. Back at the house, Tony's phone rang, but he ignored it. He was in the middle of a meeting with Jessica, trying to avoid further confrontation. When the hospital finally reached him, he arrived in a panic, met by Joy in the waiting room. She collapsed, Joy said, her voice tight with emotion. They're running tests. Tony's face shifted, a blend of guilt and fear. Why didn't she tell anyone she was feeling this bad? Joy gave him a long, cold look. Maybe because you weren't around to ask. Hours dragged by until the doctor approached them. She's stable, but her stress levels are dangerously high. We'll be keeping her overnight for monitoring. Tony nodded stiffly, but Joy wasn't done. As they stood outside the ward room, she whispered, If she doesn't make it, you'll carry that weight, Tony. Don't you dare pretend you didn't see the signs. 2 days later, the hospital called again. This time it wasn't Joy or Tony who answered, it was Chris. The doctor's tone was calm but direct. She didn't wake up this morning. We're deeply sorry. Chris's chest tightened. He asked for details, confirmation, anything that might explain the sudden turn. The hospital reported cardiac arrest. No warning signs beyond the stress-related complications. When Chris hung up, he didn't call Tony right away. Instead, he sat quietly in his office, eyes closed, jaw clenched. Only when he was fully composed did he dial Joy. Her gasp on the other end was instant, followed by silence, then quiet sobbing. "She didn't deserve this," Joy whispered. "She gave everything to that man." Tony's reaction was more performative than pained. When Chris finally informed him, he stared blankly for a moment before muttering, "Wait. What? Are you serious?" Jessica was seated beside him and immediately covered her mouth in shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. Tony stood pacing in disbelief. "I didn't think she was. She was just tired. How does someone just—" His words trailed off. Jessica rubbed his back. "I'm so sorry, babe. This is going to hit the public hard. You need to hold it together." Chris listened to their exchange, eyes narrowing. He knew grief, and what he was witnessing wasn't it. The hospital's arranging a private burial. "Tonya didn't want a public funeral," Chris said flatly. Tony blinked. "She said that?" Chris nodded. "It was part of her legal arrangements. She didn't want a scene." Jessica exhaled in relief, but something in Chris's tone lingered, like a quiet storm waiting to erupt. The living room felt unnaturally quiet as Tony returned from the brief burial ceremony. Just him, Jessica, and a few distant relatives. No speeches, no hymns, just a name on a headstone and dust settling over secrets. Jessica moved through the house like she owned it, pouring Tony a glass of whiskey and sitting beside him with an air of victory masked as sympathy. "You okay?" she asked softly, running her fingers along his arm. Tony nodded, staring blankly at the television screen, though it wasn't on. "She's really gone," he murmured. "Just like that." Jessica tilted her head. "I know it's hard, but maybe it's time to stop feeling guilty. You weren't happy, Tony. You were surviving." He turned to look at her. "I didn't hate her." Jessica's expression faltered, but only for a second. She shifted closer, curling into him. "You don't have to justify anything. You loved her once, but now we can start over. No more sneaking around, no more guilt." Her voice was honey-sweet, laced with quiet triumph. Tony didn't say much. Grief was a shapeshifter. Sometimes numb, sometimes sharp. But deep down, something didn't sit right. Maybe it was how fast Jessica had moved in, how comfortable she was in a space that still smelled like Tonya. Or maybe it was how little tears he'd shed, how little resistance he felt. Still, when Jessica whispered, "She's at peace now," he nodded. It was easier than admitting he didn't know what peace even meant anymore. In the stillness, Jessica's eyes flicked toward the staircase. This house, this life, it was all finally within reach. And in her mind, it was only just beginning. Jessica hummed softly as she stood before the mirror, adjusting the pearl necklace that once belonged to Tonya. She had found it tucked neatly in the top drawer of the vanity and hadn't hesitated to claim it. It looked good on her, she thought, admiring her reflection. Tony hadn't objected. If anything, he seemed grateful to be distracted from his thoughts. The master bedroom was now their bedroom, and Jessica moved through it like a queen in her castle. She changed the sheets, rearranged the closet, replaced framed wedding photos with pictures of herself and Tony at resorts and rooftop dinners. Every trace of Tonya was slowly, meticulously removed. "New energy, new life," she whispered as she sprayed perfume into the air, drowning out the scent of the past. Downstairs, Tony sat slouched in an armchair, sipping coffee that Jessica had made, too sweet, but he didn't complain. "You're settling in fast," he said, not looking up. Jessica smiled as she walked in, wearing one of Tonya's silk robes. "Is that a problem?" He glanced at her. "Just surreal, that's all." She sat on his lap and cupped his face. "This house doesn't have to be a tomb. It can be home again, ours." Her words were gentle, but they had an edge. Tony forced a smile and kissed her cheek. But something gnawed at him. Every drawer Jessica opened, every room she claimed, it all felt too soon. Like the love she professed came with a price tag and blueprints. And while he let her take control, a strange emptiness echoed through the halls. Not because Tonya was gone, but because a part of him feared she had taken the soul of the house with her. It was Chris who filed the motion to open the will. Tony didn't waste time inquiring about the inheritance. Tonia had left behind valuable shares, properties, and bonds under their joint name. Now that she was gone, he was eager to make sure things were transferred without complications. Sitting across from the estate attorney, Tony tapped his pen on the polished mahogany table. "I just want to get everything finalized," he said coolly. Jessica, seated beside him in a fitted black blazer, chimed in, "Tonia would have wanted this done properly." Chris raised an eyebrow. "Indeed," he said evenly. "But it's not as simple as signing a few documents. Tonia made some updates in the last month. We'll need to review everything carefully." Tony frowned. "Updates? What kind of updates?" Chris opened a folder slowly, eyes not leaving Tony's. "We'll get to that in court. It's what she instructed." Tony leaned back. "Court? Why? I'm her husband. We were still married." Jessica placed a hand on his thigh to calm him, but Chris remained composed. "It's precisely why the process must be formal. You'll want everything to be legitimate, won't you?" The air shifted. Jessica's smile faltered. Tony exhaled. "Fine. When's the hearing?" Chris glanced at his watch. "A week from today." As Tony signed a preliminary notice, Chris studied him, the smug assurance, the entitlement, the lack of sorrow. He folded the papers carefully. The trap was nearly set. Tonia hadn't just updated her will, she'd rewritten the narrative. And soon, the performance would come to a stunning end. The house was quiet when Joy arrived, too quiet for a place that used to echo with warmth and laughter. Tonia had invited her over countless times, girl talks, impromptu dinners, quiet celebrations. But now it felt like she had stepped into a museum. She stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, heart aching. It wasn't just that Jessica had rearranged everything, it was the absence of Tonia's essence that grieved her most. The wedding portrait was gone. The lavender diffuser replaced with jasmine. And in the corner, Jessica's suitcase lay unzipped like she had claimed victory without a second thought. Joy walked over to the vanity, brushing her hand across the surface. Her fingers landed on a jewelry box, empty. She closed her eyes and exhaled sharply. "I miss you, girl," she whispered to the room, her voice cracking. She sat on the edge of the bed and let her gaze roam. "They really think they've won." Her words floated into the silence like a promise. She remembered how Tonia had hugged her tightly before that last hospital visit, how her eyes had held something unspoken. She had sensed it then, that Tonia wasn't done fighting. Rising to her feet, Joy walked through the house slowly, taking mental notes of every change, every piece of Tonia erased. As she stepped outside, her phone buzzed. It was Chris. "Everything is still on schedule," he said. Joy's voice was steady. "Good. Let them continue dancing. The music's about to stop." She ended the call, looked back at the house, and smiled faintly. The Queen may have been hidden, but her return was inevitable. Chris sat alone in his office, reviewing the final documents with laser focus. Every clause, every timestamp, every notarized page Tonia had signed had been stored in a private vault and duplicated for safety. He remembered the look in her eyes the day she gave him the last signed copy of the will. "If they try to devour me, Chris, make sure they choke on my silence." She had smiled softly then, her fingers steady, her eyes filled with quiet resolve. Now, with the court hearing days away, he double-checked the protective orders, the audio recordings, the video message she had left behind. Everything was ready. And more importantly, everything was legal. He leaned back in his chair, a satisfied breath escaping his lips. They had no idea. Tony, so used to control, was walking into a courtroom that would unravel him inch by inch. Jessica, blinded by greed, had underestimated the one woman she could never truly replace. As Chris dialed Joy, his voice was calm but resolute. The trap shut, no leaks, no delays. Joy's laughter was short and low. "They're already picking out paint colors for a future they'll never have." Chris smiled. "By this time next week, they won't know what hit them." After the call, he placed the final folder in his briefcase, locked it, and turned off the lights. The shadows of betrayal were about to meet the brilliance of truth, and in that courtroom, silence would speak louder than anything they ever imagined. The courtroom buzzed with muted voices as people filed in, the soft rustle of papers and distant coughs filling the air. Tony entered wearing a tailored navy blue suit, his expression cool and unreadable. Jessica walked beside him, dressed in sleek black and heels that clicked confidently against the marble. "Let's just get this over with," she whispered. Tony nodded, slipping his phone into his pocket as they approached the front row. To outsiders, they looked like a polished power couple, composed, united. But Chris, already seated at the plaintiff's table, watched them with quiet amusement. He made no move to greet them. Instead, he opened his case file slowly, like a man preparing to conduct an orchestra. Jessica leaned toward Tony. "Where's Joy? And why does Chris look so smug?" Tony glanced around. She probably didn't want to be here. And Chris, he's always like that. But something in his gut twisted. The judge soon entered, and the courtroom rose in silence. After a few formalities, the judge opened the file that had been sealed for weeks. Today's hearing will address the reading of the last will and testament of Mrs. Tonya Adwale. Tony exhaled slowly, trying to look composed. Jessica crossed her legs, a small smile playing on her lips. "Let's hear what your dear wife left behind," she whispered smugly. Chris said nothing, but his fingers brushed over a hidden document in his folder. The game had officially begun, and they had no clue just how much they were about to lose. Joy entered the courtroom quietly, dressed in a simple navy dress and low heels, choosing a seat near the back. She kept her head low, her presence unnoticed by Tony and Jessica, who remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. Her eyes flicked to Chris, who gave the faintest nod of acknowledgement. Around them, murmurs rose and fell, former business associates, nosy neighbors, and even a few of Tonya's distant relatives had come to witness what they expected to be a mundane, legal formality. Joy's fingers curled around the strap of her purse as she scanned the room, observing the smug tilt of Jessica's chin, the rehearsed stillness in Tony's shoulders. They truly believed this was their moment of closure, their golden ticket to start anew. She leaned back and whispered to herself, "Let the show begin." At the front, Chris remained composed, meticulously arranging the files before him. He had rehearsed this day with Tonya more than once, planned every beat like a conductor before a symphony. As the judge called for silence and picked up the sealed envelope, the energy in the room shifted. Tony adjusted his tie, Jessica straightened in her seat. From where she sat, Joy could see the flash of arrogance in their faces, the assumption that wealth, control, and reputation would all fall neatly into their hands. But as the judge cleared his throat and began reading, the air in the room cooled, thickening with anticipation. "This document, dated 3 weeks prior to Mrs. Adwale's passing, supersedes all previous versions of her will," the judge began. Chris sat still as stone, but his eyes gleamed. The foundation had been laid. Now came the fracture. Tony crossed his arms, barely containing his impatience as the judge flipped to the second page of the will. "It is my final wish," the judge continued, "that my estate, comprising residential properties, business shares, vehicles, and all personal assets, be handled in accordance with the instructions outlined here." He paused to glance over the rims of his glasses. "These instructions are unconventional." Jessica leaned in, lips parting slightly. "Unconventional?" she whispered. Tony whispered back, "Don't panic." But his foot tapped restlessly under the table. The judge's voice deepened. "To clarify, Mr. Anthony Adwale is not the sole beneficiary, nor is Miss Jessica Chica authorized to make any legal claim to my estate." A stunned silence swept through the room. Tony's head shot up. "What?" he barked, standing up abruptly. The judge didn't flinch. "Please remain seated, Mr. Adwale. You'll be given a chance to speak after the reading." Jessica's mouth hung open. "But that makes no sense. She's dead. She didn't have—" The judge raised a hand. "All will become clear shortly." Chris resisted the urge to smile. This was only the beginning. Joy folded her arms and leaned forward slightly. She could feel the room tilting, the smug certainty in Tony and Jessica's faces beginning to dissolve. The judge continued, "In the event of my untimely passing, I have outlined a full transfer of my assets to a private holding, to one that does not grant immediate access to any relative or spouse, pending a final clause." Tony's face turned pale. Jessica reached for his hand. "Tony, what's going on?" He had no answer because for the first time in a long while he wasn't in control. The judge turned to the final page, his tone slowing, growing firmer. Per the revised and notarized will, all assets, including real estate, financial investments, vehicles, and intellectual properties, are to be held by a private trust created and controlled under the name of a singular legal entity known as Eterna Holdings. The room erupted in gasps and scattered whispers. Tony looked like he'd been slapped. "What the hell is Eterna Holdings?" he snapped. Chris finally spoke, his voice calm, deliberate. "It's a registered entity created under Tonia's direction, fully authorized and validated, with independent board members, none of whom include you." Jessica stood, voice trembling. "She can't do that. I mean, she's gone. Who's managing it now?" Chris looked at her, expression unreadable. "That's the part you'll want to pay attention to." The judge nodded slowly. "Per her wishes, all questions regarding the trust will be answered by its acting trustee, who will arrive momentarily." Tony's jaw tightened. "Acting trustee? What does that even mean? She's dead." Chris leaned forward. "Is she?" And as the room fell into stunned silence, the courtroom doors opened. Gasps filled the air, chairs creaked as people rose in disbelief. Tonia stepped in, dressed in deep emerald, her head held high, and her presence undeniable. Tony's knees buckled, and Jessica's scream pierced the silence. Tonia's eyes met Chris's for a brief moment before she turned to the courtroom. "I apologize for being late," she said softly, "but I thought it was important I attend my own will reading." And in that breathless second, the world turned upside down. Tonia stood at the center of the courtroom, the fabric of her emerald dress catching the light like armor. The room remained frozen, people struggling to reconcile the woman before them with the one they believed to be buried. Even the judge's lips parted slightly, though he had known. Jessica stumbled backward, grabbing onto the bench for support, while Tony simply stared, face blank and bloodless. "You're dead," he whispered. Tonia tilted her head slightly. "Clearly not. But thank you for confirming how quickly you moved on." Her voice was calm, too calm, and it echoed in the shocked stillness of the courtroom. "This was the only way to expose the depth of betrayal," she continued. "And I must say, you didn't disappoint." Tony finally found his voice. "You faked your death?" he asked, his tone accusing, as if he were the victim. "You let everyone think you died?" Tonia's eyes narrowed. "I gave everyone the version of me they treated me like, absent. Replaceable." She turned to Jessica, who could barely meet her gaze. "You wore my robe, my necklace, slept in my bed, and thought it made you me?" The courtroom stirred. Tonia stepped forward, addressing the judge. "All documentation is in order. I never died. My medical team, under legal protection, monitored and preserved the illusion long enough for the true colors around me to reveal themselves." Chris handed over the original medical file, stamped and signed. The judge reviewed it, then nodded once. Legal identity reinstated. Tony sank into his seat, stunned into silence. Tonia glanced at him, her voice cool. "I may have vanished, but now I return with everything, including the truth." The silence shattered the moment the judge confirmed Tonia's legal identity was intact. "This is madness," Jessica shouted, stepping forward. "This isn't justice, it's manipulation." She turned to Tony. "Say something. She lied to all of us." But Tony looked like he had aged 10 years in a minute. She outsmarted us," he muttered, voice hollow. Jessica's face twisted in disbelief. "You're giving up?" Her voice cracked as she turned to Tonia. "You played with people's lives." Tonia folded her arms. "I watched as mine was being ripped apart, Jessica. I stayed quiet while you lived in my home, kissed my husband, and paraded as a queen. Tell me, how was that not playing with mine?" Jessica tried to speak, but words failed her. All she could do was tremble. The courtroom began buzzing with whispers. Reporters scribbled notes. Even the court clerk stole glances at Tonia in disbelief. Meanwhile, Tony's chest rose and fell unevenly. He turned toward her, his voice barely audible. "You let me believe you were dead. You made me grieve." Tonia's brows lifted. "Grieve? Is that what you call throwing a woman into your house and into my place before the grave soil even settled?" She stepped closer, her presence commanding. "You both played a game, and I let it run its course. But now the board is mine." Jessica lunged forward, but Chris intercepted her calmly. "I suggest you sit down, Miss Chica. Things are about to get much worse for you. And as she sat, face burning with shame, the reality sank in. The woman they buried had returned, not to beg, but to bury them in truth. Chris reached into his case and retrieved a flash drive, handing it to the court assistant. Per Tonia's instructions, the next phase includes audiovisual evidence, he said. A screen was rolled forward, and the lights dimmed slightly. The footage began with a recording from a private camera installed in the home. Jessica prancing through the house, mocking Tonia's photo. She was so soft, Jessica said to Tony on screen, pouring wine. Weak, that's why she couldn't keep you. Laughter followed. Tonia didn't blink. She stared straight ahead as the entire room was forced to witness what she had already endured in silence. Another clip played, this time Tony laughing in a lounge. She's probably better off gone, he had joked. Now I can finally breathe. The air in the courtroom grew dense. No one laughed now. Tony buried his face in his hands. Jessica whispered, "Turn it off," but the video rolled on. Clip after clip showed their arrogance, their plans to seize control of the house, the accounts, the shares. One particularly sharp scene revealed Jessica flipping through Tonia's documents. "Once we get this process," she said, "everything will be yours. Then Tony, ours." The final clip was the most damning, a conversation where Tony admitted to emotionally starving Tonia on purpose. "I wanted her to break first, make the divorce easier." The courtroom was silent when the video ended. Tonia stepped forward. "This was my life," she said softly, turning toward the judge. "And I chose not to scream, I chose to record. Because I knew truth doesn't need noise, just patience." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in stunned admiration. The woman they tried to erase had become the proof of her own vindication. Tonia stepped forward, the courtroom dead silent as her heels clicked softly against the floor. She turned slowly to face both Tony and Jessica, her expression unreadable. "You both built your lives on the assumption that I was weak," she began, "that I was blind, that I would stay silent or disappear quietly. But let me say this once and for all, I was never the fool." Jessica's eyes darted toward Tony, who sat frozen, his jaw clenched tight. Tonia's voice softened, but it cut sharper. "The difference between you and me, Jessica, is that you needed to be seen. I knew how to move in the dark." She looked Tony squarely in the eye. "And you? You needed a cheerleader, not a partner. You didn't outgrow me. You downgraded." Tony opened his mouth, but no words came. The air between them felt electric, weighted by all the betrayal and broken promises. "I spent years of my life building with you," Tonia continued, "trusting you to protect the life we swore to share. And what did you do? Hand it over to a stranger in the name of freedom." She turned toward the judge. "But I don't want his apologies. I don't want his explanations. I just want what belongs to me, and peace." The judge nodded slowly, visibly moved. Jessica tried to interject, voice shaking. "This isn't fair. She tricked us." Tonia turned to her with a piercing stare. "You weren't tricked. You were watched. And what you did in shadows has now become your undoing, in public." For once, Jessica had nothing to say. Her game was over. The fallout began the next morning. Headlines screamed the scandal. Wife returns from the dead to expose husband and mistress in courtroom bombshell. Tony awoke to a barrage of missed calls from shareholders, board members, and clients. His business account had been temporarily frozen following a petition from Tonia's legal team. Chris had filed lawsuits on Tonia's behalf, one for financial fraud, another for emotional and psychological abuse, and a third against Jessica for theft of private property. "You forged her signature to access one of her safes," Chris told Jessica's attorney during a deposition. "We have fingerprints and security footage." Jessica sat with her head bowed, face pale. Her lawyer whispered urgently, but she barely heard. Everything was unraveling faster than she could process. Meanwhile, Tony's professional reputation took a nosedive. The board of his company held an emergency meeting to discuss his removal as CEO. Shareholders had already begun to withdraw support, citing ethical concerns. "You built your image on being a family man," one board member said bluntly. "Now your wife's court testimony and the evidence against you contradict everything you've portrayed." Tony tried to argue, but the momentum had shifted beyond his control. At home, he found the locks changed. The house, legally returned to Tonia, was no longer his sanctuary. Tonia had left him with exactly what he had given her. Nothing. Chris called to deliver the final blow. You may wish to settle out of court, because if this goes to trial, we will pursue damages that'll strip you of what little you have left. And for the first time, Tony realized this wasn't just about money, it was about consequences. Jessica returned to the house one evening, only to find her key no longer worked. She rattled the doorknob, her heart pounding. A security guard emerged from the side gate. Miss, I was instructed to inform you that you're no longer authorized on this property. She blinked. Excuse me? He handed her a letter, sealed and stamped. Effective immediately. Miss Tonia Adwale has reclaimed full legal possession. You're to vacate any belongings from the guest house by end of day. After that, access will be denied permanently. Jessica laughed bitterly, but it cracked. She can't just throw me out like that. The guard didn't flinch. She can. And she has. Jessica stood frozen on the pavement, a duffel bag at her feet, and nowhere to go. Inside, Tonia stood by the window, watching from a distance. Joy appeared beside her with a cup of tea. You didn't have to be here for this, Joy said gently. Tonia took a sip, calm and unshaken. I needed to see her walk away empty-handed. It's the closure I never got. Down the street, Jessica shoved her belongings into a taxi, her hands shaking as tears finally escaped. No more silk robes, no more private chefs, no more illusion of victory. Just reality, the kind Tonia had endured in silence for too long. As the car pulled away, Tonia turned from the window, her voice soft. They replaced me like I was nothing. And now they'll understand exactly what that costs. Joy nodded. And they'll never forget it. The house was silent again, but this time it was no longer hollow. It was healing. The silence in Tony's new apartment was deafening. The walls were white bare, no framed photos, no warmth, no trace of a home. He sat in a cracked leather chair, staring at the muted television, a bottle of scotch in his hand. The blinds were closed, and the smell of takeout lingered from the night before. His phone buzzed repeatedly, emails, press inquiries, warnings from his company's board, but he ignored them all. Everything that once defined him had slipped through his fingers. The woman he thought he could replace had dismantled him without screaming, without yelling, just truth and strategy, and now all he had left was regret. How did I not see this coming? He muttered to himself. But deep down he knew. He chose not to see. A knock came at the door. He didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time. Finally, he rose and opened it to find his brother, Caleb, standing there with a bag of groceries. You look like hell, Caleb said bluntly. Tony stepped aside, wordless. Caleb walked in and glanced around. So this is where pride got you. Tony slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I messed up. I lost everything. Caleb sat beside him. No, you threw everything away. You had a woman who built a life with you, and you gambled it for attention. Tony's voice cracked. She outplayed me. Caleb scoffed. She didn't play Tony. She survived. That's what real strength looks like. The words hit him harder than he expected. And as the sun dipped behind the buildings, Tony finally understood the weight of what he'd destroyed. Jessica stood outside a cafe, her designer handbag clutched tightly to her chest, though it held little more than a few makeup items and an old phone. She had spent the past few nights in a motel on the outskirts of the city, calling in favors that were quickly being declined. The friends who once cheered her on had gone silent. One of her former clients walked past and glanced at her with disdain. I thought you were better than that, the woman muttered. Jessica turned away, ashamed. She had applied to 3 PR firms that week, each rejection swifter than the last. Word had spread, and no one wanted to be associated with the scandal. She checked her phone again, no missed calls. Not from Tony, not from anyone. Later that evening, she stood in front of a mirror in the motel bathroom, makeup smeared and eyes hollow. Her reflection didn't resemble the woman who once sauntered through Tonia's hallway in silk and perfume. She whispered, "What did I even win?" Her voice cracked. No response came, not from the mirror, not from the silence around her. She remembered Tonia's face in the courtroom, calm, centered, powerful. Jessica had tried to wear her life like a costume, but now that it was stripped away, she realized she never fit the role. The knock on her motel door startled her. It was the receptionist with a reminder. Her time was up. She had until morning to check out. Jessica nodded, her throat tight. As the door closed, she sat on the bed, tears streaming silently. The world she chased had crumbled, and there was no one left to blame. The ocean breeze kissed Tonia's face as she sat beneath a striped umbrella, her feet buried in soft sand. She sipped fresh coconut water, a book resting on her lap, but forgotten. For the first time in years, her heart felt still. Not numb, not heavy, just still. Joy sat beside her, sun hat tilted low. "You haven't touched that book in 30 minutes, Joy teased. Tonia smiled faintly. "I'm just breathing." Like my lungs forgot what peace felt like. They both fell into a companionable silence, the waves lapping gently in the distance. Tonia leaned back in her chair, her mind far from courtrooms and betrayal. She thought not of what she had lost, but of what she had reclaimed herself. That night, back at their beachfront villa, Tonia stood on the balcony wrapped in a light shawl, watching the moonlight ripple across the water. Chris had called earlier, informing her that the final lawsuit had settled in her favor. All accounts returned, all damages acknowledged, justice in full. But what moved her more wasn't the victory, it was the clarity. She whispered to the wind, "I am not broken." She wasn't seeking revenge anymore. She wasn't holding bitterness. She had faced death, figuratively and literally, and came back whole. Joy joined her, handing her a warm mug of tea. "To the woman who came back stronger," she toasted. Tonia raised her mug gently, "To never doubting myself again." And as they clinked cups, the stars above them seemed to nod in quiet agreement. The envelope arrived on a quiet Wednesday morning, no return address, just Tony's name scrawled across the front in handwriting he hadn't seen in weeks. He stared at it for a while, his coffee going cold in his hand. The apartment was still and empty, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. With a deep breath, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "Tony," it began, "this isn't a letter to shame you. You've done enough of that to yourself. This is a goodbye, not from the woman you betrayed, but from the woman you could never truly know." The words stung immediately, and he leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. "I loved you deeply. I gave you every soft part of me. And you taught me something valuable, how to love myself when the person I loved most failed to." He read on, his hands tightening as the letter cut deeper, not with cruelty, but with clarity. "You thought I wouldn't survive without you. But here I am, standing, thriving, whole. I mourned the woman I was with you, not because she was weak, but because she deserved better. You never noticed her slipping away, not because she was invisible, but because you never really looked." Tears brimmed in Tony's eyes. He blinked fast, gripping the paper like it might disappear. "This isn't revenge, Tony. It's liberation. I'm writing not to curse you, but to release myself completely. I hope one day you find peace, but not at someone else's expense." The last line struck like thunder. "I forgave you long ago. That's why I'm free. Goodbye, Tony. Tonia." He folded the letter slowly, placing it on the table like a sacred thing. And for the first time he wept alone and without excuses. The sun rose gently over the horizon as Tonia stepped onto her balcony, the soft breeze tugging at the hem of her silk robe. The sky was painted in strokes of gold and coral, a quiet testament that the world kept turning, and so had she. Her heart felt lighter, her breath deeper. The battles were behind her now, not erased, but transformed into stepping stones. As she held her morning tea, her phone vibrated with a message from Chris. Final court confirmation. Everything's officially closed. "Congrats, Tonia." She smiled faintly and typed back, "Thank you for believing in me when I forgot how to." She placed the phone down and took a deep breath, the scent of salt and blooming hibiscus rising with the morning. Joy appeared beside her, barefoot and drowsy. "You're up early," she murmured. Tonia nodded, eyes fixed on the water. "I didn't want to miss this. The first sunrise where everything feels new." Joy rested a hand on her shoulder. "You're glowing, you know." Tonia turned to her friend. "I'm healing. That's what you see." She stepped to the edge of the balcony and looked ahead, not backward. No more mourning what was stolen. No more replaying betrayal. The woman who once whispered through her pain had found her voice, and it was steady. "I didn't just survive, Joy," she said softly, eyes gleaming. "I won." And as the sun bathed her in light, Tonia lifted her chin, her spirit whole, her heart open, not to the past, but to everything still waiting. It was not revenge that brought her here. It was truth. And in truth, she stood tall. Here's the Bible verse for the story, Luke 8, verse 17. For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known and come abroad. Contextual meaning for the story. This verse reflects Tonia's journey, how betrayal and lies, once hidden in the shadows, were ultimately brought into the light. Justice didn't come through vengeance, but through patience, wisdom, and truth. Moral of the story. When truth walks in silence, betrayal dances loudly, but the end belongs to the one who never stopped standing in integrity. Patience may look powerless, but in time it becomes the most powerful voice in the room. This moral teaches that while deception may seem victorious for a moment, truth, anchored in wisdom and self-respect, always rises. Tonia didn't retaliate with hate or violence. She let the truth speak, and in doing so, she reclaimed her power with dignity. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.